Well, I have to give a shout out to Tom Roth for the amazing updated slides. Tom, they look great. And, you know, while I'm on the subject, thank you. Thank you to Tom Roth with our CTSI. I thank you to Courtney Hayes at Best Health. And of course, I thank Audrey Belfero with our ADRC. Thanks, guys. Y'all, these are the brains behind this production. And of course, the main one I want to thank is you, because without y'all, we wouldn't have anything to do on the second Tuesday of every month. So thank you for always being a part of this and for giving us ideas for sessions. It's exciting, it's fun. And, you know, I feel like even though I may not be able to see all of you, it's so great when I'm out in the community and I even have my back turned and I'm having a conversation with somebody and a person will walk up and go, "Are you Deb with AgingWell?" And it's like, oh, first of all, I apologize for apparently having such a very distinctive Southern accent. You know, those Mississippi roots run deep with me. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful to connect with people either by email or by phone or when I bump into you in the community. So thank you so much. And you know, keep that up. I love hearing from everybody. I love knowing what we're doing right, what you'd like to see different. Keep us on our toes because what we're doing is just for you. We're excited. I can't believe it's July. I cannot believe we've already had July 4th. I know it's, you know, the kids are always dreading back to school and I guess there's enough of a kid in me still that I just love the summer. I just love being out and about. And, you know, what we were thinking is because there are so many summer events going on that maybe this would be a good month to do a dessert. And I will warn you on the front end, it is extremely decadent, but it's extremely delicious. And so just like all things wonderful, moderation is the key. But if you like a pecan pie, I'm pretty sure you might like these walnut butter tarts. I got to go over to Cheesecakes by Alex, and Alex Amoroso is the owner. And he took me through the whole steps of making these wonderful tarts. And so anyway, I would lift these up to you. I will tell you, they have a ton of other things. Clearly they have cheesecakes, but this was something fun and he thought would be easy for y'all to make. So I hope you enjoy. So Chef Alex, take it away.
Thanks, Deb. It's great to be part of AgingWell. So today we're going to make a traditional Canadian butter tart. It's similar to Southern pecan pie. We make them in small tarts. You can use walnuts or pecans. Walnuts are very traditional. So we're going to start out by making tart dough. We've already made the dough and chilled it. So that's the most important part, is to use cold butter when you're making the dough. When you're looking at this recipe, keep the dough as cold as possible. If you have the opportunity, let it sit up overnight in the fridge before you start rolling it out. Otherwise, you're not going to be happy with the results. Luckily, we have a large sheeter at the bakery. So we're going to start out with that so we can turn out a lot of dough, and then at the end we'll show you how to hand roll the tarts at home. So we'll start with this. So this is just like a glorified large, you know, dough roller. Just has a big rolling pin in the middle. And we're just basically shaping everything. And this dough is very cold. It's been sitting overnight. So it takes all the elbow work out of it. And when we get right down to the last pass here, it'll be exactly where we want it to make the tart shells. This is very cold dough. And the idea is to get these cut and back in the fridge. So we're going to take the tart pans, we're going to spray those, we're going to cut the tart dough and then place those right into the pans. Now a lot of times you'll do what's called a blind bake on tart shells, where you'll take and put, a lot of people use pinto beans, some people use foil, some people use ceramic beads that you can buy, but you would blind bake the shells in the oven to make sure they're crisp before you put your ingredients in. We don't have to do those with this particular tart, we can bake it all together raw. We're doing it raw. So let's go ahead and cut those and we'll get them filled. This is the easy part. You gotta get the dough pretty thin, and it's gotta be cold too. So it's just important to work with it pretty quickly when you go to the shells. So now this scrap, it's still cold, and you can re-roll it out. And what I'm going to show you now is how you do it by hand. So you don't want to knead it too much because you don't want it to be really tough. Let me see that flour real quick. So flour your board a little bit. And you want to grab your rolling pin. And then you're just going to work the dough as quickly as you can to get it flat. Make sure you keep plenty of flour top and bottom. Keep even. Turn your dough. Don't let it stick. Remember, it's so much butter in there, it'll just kind of stick to everything. And then get to your thickness, probably a little less than 1/8 of an inch. Make sure it's loose, and then go ahead and cut those, and you can use that way. So that's kind of how you do it by hand. Make sure it's cold when you do it, and then you go from there. All right, so now we're going to take these tart shells, and we're going to fold them into the pans. Just kind of tuck them down inside. Make sure they get all the way to the bottom, get all the air out. Press them against the sides. And then you can take the knife. I typically take the back of the knife and I just draw it towards me against the top of the shell. And it'll kind of press it to the shell and cut it right off where you need it. So you get one just like that. We'll do a couple more. They're not that hard. The kids can get involved. I would give them a butter knife so they don't have a really sharp knife. These tart shell pans you can pick up at any restaurant supply store, any bakery shop will carry these. But the idea is to get to this point with the dough still being clear cold and not kind of falling apart on you. Okay. Michaela is usually one that does these during the day. We do a couple of different flavors. You know, with this tart dough, you can do anything. You can do, you know, once you par-bake them like we talked about in the oven, you could do chocolate tarts. We do key lime and lemon tarts, you know, with meringue on it. We'll do these butter tarts. You can really do anything that you want. I mean, this is just a good basic pie crust type of recipe, and you can make whatever you want. You could even go savory if you wanted to, make some mini quiche. Really, it's whatever you want to put in it. This time of year with all the vegetables and things that are available, you could easily do a nice quiche. So we're going to assemble the tarts right now. Like I said, with these you don't have to pre-bake them. With most other tarts, chocolate, lemon, you don't really cook the filling that long. So you want to pre-bake the tarts so they're crisp and not gooey on the bottom. And then we'll send you instructions on how to do that. But typically people would put a piece of paper or wax paper or tinfoil in, and maybe some dry pinto beans or something to keep the weight down so they don't puff up too much out of it. You can also pierce them with a fork like you do in a pie shell, but just to keep them down. But these cook at a higher temperature. They cook at about 400 degrees. And so it fully cooks the tart top and bottom, where other tarts cook at 325 or 350 degrees. So we've got brown sugar, we've got corn syrup, we've got eggs, vanilla extract, and then we have walnuts. So these are walnut halves. They call them pieces, but they're fairly large. So we go into the tart and we just kind of lay out. You don't have to overfill it, just put enough in there. You want to have, like I said, like a good pecan pie or something. There's probably, you know, an ounce or two in each one, but I'll send you that information as well. So get these guys all ready to go. You know, we do all kinds of tarts here. We do all kinds of muffins. You come by and try us out. We're here in town in Winston as well as in Greensboro on South Elm Street. We serve the same products at both locations, so if you like it here, you can get it there. These have become pretty popular. All the tarts. I think we need to start doing a chocolate. We don't really do a chocolate right now. We do lemon, key lime, and these walnut pretty regularly. And I'm a fan of pecan, but I tend to like the walnut. It's just a little something different. And here again, play with it. You know, if there's something different you like, you want to put cashew nut or something, some other type of thing, or maybe mix in for the holidays, maybe add cranberries to it or something, you know, go right ahead. All right, so we have the brown sugar. We're just going to loosen it up. We're going to add our egg. This is kind of a dump and run kind of thing. Our corn syrup is going in. Our vanilla extract, and then our butter, our melted butter. And then we're just going to blend all this up. Going to make a very sweet slurry. Just make sure you mix it till you've got no lumps left in it. And if you've ever made cinnamon rolls, it kind of makes that same base that goes inside a cinnamon roll. It's just that liquid. We're going to take this and I'm going to transfer it to a pan that we can pour from. Makes it a little bit easier. So now we're going to start to fill. You don't want to overfill. Just put a little on each of them. Make sure you've got enough for everybody. This recipe makes 12. So, you know, you can take them raw like this, and I'm not going to have enough to go around too, but you can make them raw like this and then freeze them, but you've got to make sure that you do a really good job of thawing them out before you go to bake them. Otherwise, they're going to be raw. So you can tell I overfilled the first few. That's okay. So this is what you're going to get when you're ready to go in the oven. So they're all complete. Like I said, almost like pecan pie. These are going to go in the oven at 400 degrees. They're going to bake for 5 minutes. Turn them and bake them for another 5. And turn them, we're just meaning just flip around the other side or change shelves. That way you're browning. Some people's ovens don't heat as well as others. So we'll get these in the oven and you can see the finished product when they come out. We're going to put these on sheet pans for our ovens. Now these are commercial ovens. They're convection, so they have air that circulates around the oven, so they heat up fine. At home, you may have to test it. You may want to put them on without it. They have a bottom to them. You may want to put them right on the rack and just play with it and test it out, see which works best for you. If you have the luxury of having convection, then that's great. You can put them right on a sheet pan and bake them that way. It's just easier to get them all in and out of the oven if they're on one pan. Good? Okay, so here's the finished product. Naturally, these have cooled off, so you know I'm not burning my hand. Nice and toasted around the edges. So they've got a nice glaze to it. I mean, it looks like pecan pie, you know. But the filling, you know, hardens up nicely. We serve them cold here. You know, they're pretty awesome. Yeah.
So I don't know if y'all caught his just absolutely infectious laugh, but I will tell you, there are not many people that love what they do as much as Alex does. So anyway, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Alex. I think you're watching us tonight. We're grateful for you to take the time and teach us how to make your beautiful tarts. So anyway, and now we're going to move on to another adventure right here in Winston-Salem. I don't know how many of you have ever visited SECA. It's the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art. And they are literally right off Renolda Road in this lovely, quiet, natural neighborhood. It sits on 22 acres of beautiful, beautiful property at the estate of the late Haynes, Mr. Haynes. And so anyway, we are going to have a backstage tour by Dr. Bill Carpenter, who is the director of SECA. He's going to show us some of the most recent exhibits, going to show us some of the property, and you might get a little special greeting right in the middle of this video from a fun crowd.
Thank you, Deb. It's great to be a part of Aging Well. Bill Carpenter here at the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art, and welcome to everybody. I'm standing in front of the home of James G. Haynes, who was part of the Haynes family, who brought Haynes Tobacco and ultimately Haynes Hosiery here to Winston-Salem. And James G. Haynes donated this house to Sika in 1974, and we opened our first galleries in 1976. Returning visitors will probably be familiar with this door. This used to be the main entrance to Sika. We've now moved that down to our auditorium and gallery lobby so that folks can experience the galleries as their first thing. And we are really looking forward to having folks out here at the Haynes House for events, for personal reflection, to just walk the grounds and to spend some time in the house. It's a welcoming and warm place. It's got a lot of family vibes to it and a lot of places to just sit and relax and be one with nature or one with your friends. We sit on 22 acres of grounds. We've got some trails and some walkways, and of course we got a beautiful pond behind the house. The Haynes House itself is about to be rebranded and renovated into a wonderful cultural events center where we'll be able to host talks and dinners and concerts and also have a coffee shop and a small retail shop. And so within the next few years, visitors are going to see some really great changes to the space and really be able to spend some time here sort of between home and between work as a place to just kind of relax and enjoy some company. So why don't we go inside and take a look at the house and then wind our ways down to the gallery. Come on. So we're standing in the great living room of the Haynes House. This is where James G. Haynes and his family would have entertained guests. They often would have had parties up here, especially during Prohibition, and then they would have gone down to the basement below us to kind of party the night away and then come back up to breakfasts in the early mornings. But this is a wonderful space that that's open to the public, but we also rent out for small gatherings, wedding receptions, dinners. We host artist talks, and we even hosted some classical and electronic music concerts in this space. And along the wall, you'll see that we've made space for pieces that come from the Wake Forest Student Collection, which is the collection that the students purchase every 4 years from New York galleries. And they've been doing that for almost 50 or 60 years now. So this is a great space to come in. The art changes. There's wonderful views of the backyard and just a place to really kind of come down and connect and talk with folks. I think one of the hidden gems of the Haynes House is the backyard area, the terrace that I'm standing on, and below that the patio, all of which is free and open to the public during our regular open hours. And we also hold regular events out here, dinners, rentals, concerts. We have a stage down by the lake where we've been hosting Lyrics by the Lake, which happens every other Friday this summer. We've also hosted the North Carolina Brass Band and a few other shows. And you'll see that we've got sculptures on the ground from Charlie Brower. His sculptures are not only around our property all over, but inside as a way to kind of surprise you as you're turning corners. But we think that this is a really beautiful space to come and spend some time with nature and to take in the views of the lake, and to, when we have our own events, to have a drink and to have a cup of coffee and just enjoy yourself here. On view here in our Southern Idiom Gallery is Living on the Line by Carlos Montes de Oca. And we're really proud of the Southern Idiom exhibition. This is where we get to work specifically with artists from Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, and we get to give them private, individual shows. We get to do openings for them, and all of the art that you see here in this gallery is also for sale. So this is a great place to come and be able to support local artists and to see what art is actually happening here in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. Sika has a lot of what we think of as just kind of funky spaces, ancillary spaces, and we were lucky enough to work with sculptor Charlie Brower to fill these spaces with some of his works, and I'm standing in front of one right now, and it's just this wonderful intervention in what used to be an actual like potting area. And so this area used to have sort of some flowers and some potted plants, but you see Charlie's put in these wonderful kind of tripods that mirror his ladders outside and his themes of home and house. And all the way down the hall is a number of his works that are just kind of bringing this sometimes empty space to life. And so it's really neat to be able to walk through these spaces and be surprised by what you see around the turns. Right? You know, one of the coolest things about Sika is that we have some hidden spaces, or what we call ancillary spaces here in our hallways and in our alcoves. And we were fortunate enough to work with Charlie Brewer to put some sculptures and some artwork in these spaces. And this is one of Charlie's sculptures here, goes all the way up to the ceiling. And he's got a number of these works all throughout our main hallway here. And it's a really neat thing to be able to kind of come around a corner and be surprised by one of the pieces of art, and to really be able to take a moment with it and spend time thinking about what's going on. You might also hear in the gallery some chatter and some laughter. We host regularly school groups and community groups, and we provide them with private tours and private art activities as just a way of kind of giving people that thrill of seeing art and working with materials and creating their own art. Oh, and we thought you might want to hear from some of the kids. So on display through December here in our main gallery is this fantastic show called Connecting the Dots by artist Will Wilson. Will is a Diné Navajo photographer from New Mexico, and this is a mid-career retrospective of his photography. And you'll see everything from portraiture to drone photography to self-portraits, and it's a real mix of technologies and narrative. And what Will is really trying to do is to reclaim Navajo history and Navajo stories and retell them from their own perspective. So we think this is a really exciting show. It received funding from the Ellsworth Kelly Foundation, and it's just a great opportunity to see some work from some other parts of the country. So I'm standing in front of just one of what really is a dozen or more than a dozen pieces of Will's work. And this is a great example of what he's doing with digital photography. You'll see multiple exposures. The main character is set twice into that picture. But this is taken in the New Mexico landscape around some of the abandoned uranium mines that are out there. And it's a real meditation on both the beauty and the possible degradation of our environment. And these are themes that Will really talks sort of studies throughout this entire show. But you'll see here really what I think is some of the expertise with not only with focus and design, but also development and placement. There's a wonderful interactive feature to Will's work here called the Talking Tintype Project, and you'll see throughout the gallery a number of these portraits that are taken in the old tintype style, but of contemporary folks. What you might see is these little symbols on the signs. If you download the app, the Talking Tintype app, you'll be able to hold your phone up to the picture, and then these people will come to life and actually talk to you, tell you stories, tell you bits of their history, and it's a really great way to interact. It's also a great way for these folks to sort of reclaim the history of this particular type of portraiture.
It was such a wonderful way to spend a morning out at Sika, because what is so beautiful about this place is, just like Dr. Carpenter said, you can wander the grounds forever on the trails and then wander through the galleries, whether you have a guided tour or whether you just enjoy it yourself. It was so beautiful. And I'm sorry, I thought that y'all might enjoy hearing from those kids, because there was no way we were going to keep them quiet. So we just thought, let them be part of Aging Well. So I think they all think they're going to be famous. So you know what, we just went with it. anyway, thank you so much. And, speaking of wanting to find a place to just relax and kind of be still and be quiet and find your inner self, Dr. Brenes, Dr. Gretchen Brenes is our speaker tonight. And I'm just going to be honest with y'all. She's speaking tonight at my request specifically because I am having challenges with everything that's going on in the world that I have absolutely no control over. We're all bombarded with the news of all these often very horrific things and events. And I just thought this would be a very timely topic to hear from Dr. Brenes. She is a clinical psychologist and she is a professor in gerontology at Atrium Health, Wake Forest Baptist. And she's a wonderful person. And I think if anyone can give us realistic, honest tips about how to deal with our anxiety about what's going on in the world, it's Dr. Brenes. So please, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to speak with you all tonight. Let me pull up my slides here. Okay, is everybody seeing this okay? Okay, so excuse me, I'll be talking about depression and anxiety tonight. So what exactly is anxiety? Oftentimes I get asked, what is the difference between anxiety and depression? So what we consider anxiety is a feeling of nervousness, feeling jittery and just nervous, kind of shaky. It can also encompass worry. So having a lot on your mind and not being able to get it out of your mind, even to the point of feeling panicked or extreme fear. All of those things encompass anxiety, or anxiety encompasses all of those. And so what's normal and what becomes problematic? So anxiety is something that every human being experiences. A little bit of anxiety is good because it motivates us to get things done. So if you think about work deadlines or school deadlines, those motivate us to get our work done. If we didn't have those, we might not get as much done. So a little bit of anxiety can be good, but anxiety becomes a problem when it gets to the extreme, when we are feeling anxious most of the time, and when the anxiety actually interferes with our ability to do the things we want to do and interferes with our ability to live our lives. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of different common anxiety disorders that we see in older adults. The first one is generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. And that's really the focus of this disorder is worrying. These are folks who have problems worrying too much, and they can't turn the worry off. So they can't just go watch a TV show or read a book and forget about the worry. These are folks who have great difficulty kind of shutting that worry off. And in addition to the worry, folks will feel very restless or wound up, feel on edge. They get tired really easily. But unfortunately, also what goes along with this is having difficulty actually going to sleep. So you're feeling tired all the time, but you can't fall asleep because when you go to bed, you can't turn your mind off. Your mind is just racing. And this type of anxiety can also be associated with difficulty concentrating, or your mind just completely going blank when you're talking to someone. And you can also feel pretty irritable. So this is pretty uncomfortable type of disorder to have. And again, what makes this a problem is that it interferes with your day-to-day life. Another anxiety disorder that we see is panic disorder. So this is when a person has a panic attack. And so a panic attack is a discrete period of time, often about 10 to 15 minutes, where somebody feels extremely anxious, nervous, jittery. Their heart may race, may pound. They may have difficulty breathing. They may think that they're having a heart attack or may even be dying. And what's scary about these is that these attacks come on completely out of the blue in situations where you wouldn't expect to be nervous or anxious. So you could be watching a TV show and have these anxiety attacks. And again, what makes this a problem is these attacks can lead people to decide that they're not going to leave their house. They're not going to go out and do things that they want to do, or they limit their behaviors to such a degree that it really interferes with their daily lives. And the final anxiety disorder I want to talk about is called specific phobias, and that's one that most people know about. Most people are, afraid of certain things, and they'll say they have a phobia, so a phobia of snakes or a phobia of bugs. And that is when we do have an extreme fear of something. But again, it causes problems in our lives that are pretty significant. And so some of the things we see in older adults are people who have problems with claustrophobia. And if you're very uncomfortable in closed in places, imagine if you have to go get an MRI and you're in a closed MRI, you're in this tube, that can be pretty problematic. And people with claustrophobia may refuse medical tests because of their fear. Or people, most recently, we frequently had to wear masks. And if you're claustrophobic, having something cover your face like that can be extremely, extremely unsettling and distressing. And so these phobias can interfere significantly with you getting the medical care that you need. So what are some of the risk factors for anxiety disorders? Why do some people have an anxiety disorder and other people don't? So what we know so far is that people who are very, very shy as children are more likely to have anxiety and anxiety disorder as an adult. Now, that does not mean that all shy children will develop anxiety later on, but it is a risk factor for having anxiety as an adult. Another risk factor is being exposed to stressful or traumatic events. So most recently, we had COVID that we lived through for 2 years. And if you think back to when it all first started in March of 2020, at least in the US, we knew very little about it. It was very upsetting. We were told that people were dying from this, and we weren't exactly sure how it was being transmitted. People were worrying a lot, worrying about being able to see family or friends. Then along came the vaccines, and um, while the vaccines are helpful in preventing serious outcomes, people were hearing things that vaccines could be dangerous. And so again, that was another worry. We talked about having a mask on the face being claustrophobic. So that's an added stress when a lot of places wouldn't let you go into the building without having a mask on. Family gatherings became problematic. If you had members of the family who had differing views about wearing masks and vaccinations, that could cause and did cause significant family disturbances, often provoking disagreements. And even now that most of the restrictions have been lifted, we're still feeling the effects of the pandemic stress. So living under excessive stress for 2 years has impacted us mentally and also physically. So what happens when we're anxious is our body releases a hormone, releases cortisol, which is good for us in the short run. But when our body produces cortisol all the time, it has very negative effects on just about all of our bodily processes. And so that has made people be more susceptible to developing anxiety. And then just in general, after having kind of rearranged how we lived for 2 years, returning to life was anxious for some people. Being around people after having isolated themselves was very anxiety producing for folks. And so the pandemic was a significant stressor that caused anxiety and anxiety disorders in a lot of people. And we are still, even again, as the pandemic restrictions are easing up, we're still dealing with the aftermath of those effects on us. So also having a family history of anxiety or other mental health issues is a risk factor for anxiety. There's both a genetic component to anxiety as well as a learned component. So as a child, when you're exposed to a bunch of anxious people, you have a tendency to learn that way of coping and that way of thinking about things. And you may continue with that into your adulthood. There are also some physical conditions that are highly associated with anxiety. So, thyroid problems can be associated or lead to anxiety. Heart problems. And then one thing people often don't think about is substance use. So caffeine, if you have or experience a lot of anxiety and you're drinking an entire pot of coffee in the morning and then a few sodas or teas in the afternoon, you may want to try cutting back on that a little bit to see if that helps, because the caffeine can trigger you to feel jittery, which can trigger the feelings of anxiety. And then unfortunately, being a woman, so women are more likely, at least twice as likely, to have an anxiety disorder than men are. So since this is a Aging Well lecture, just some information about anxiety in older adults. Although the prevalence of anxiety decreases with age, we do find that about 15% of older adults have significant anxiety. And then some specific risk factors for anxiety in older adults include having a chronic illness, having some kind of disability, having difficulty getting around. One that's probably not surprising is being a caregiver. So when you're caring for both yourself as well as a loved one, that can create a significant amount of stress and lead to anxiety. Social isolation, again, that was particularly problematic during the pandemic. That can lead to anxiety. Being in an institution, so moving from, say, living on your own into an assisted living facility can lead to anxiety. And finally, the death of a spouse or a loved one can certainly be a stressor that can lead to anxiety. So moving on to depression. Depression is just what it sounds like, feeling depressed, sad, or down. However, what we have found is that a lot of older adults can have depression without feeling depressed. And so what does that mean? Because that doesn't sound quite right. So the main criteria for depression are feeling depressed or having a lack of interest, not feeling like doing things that you used to do, not getting joy from things that you used to enjoy doing. And so in older adults, just because a person says they're not feeling depressed doesn't mean that they're not depressed. We have to ask these questions about motivation. That's often one of the main symptoms we see in older adults who have depression: lack of motivation, or sometimes they experience it as a lack of energy to do things. And also, one thing that is significant that we see in older adults much more than younger adults is that they experience depression physically much more so. So they feel it as a more aches and pains. They may have arthritis and they've dealt with that for a long time, but it's just a lot worse. And that can be a symptom of depression. And again, what is normal versus problematic depression? Um, People will say that they're feeling depressed. It's usually that they're not really depressed, but they may be feeling their mood is a little lower than usual. But in a couple of days, they're feeling better again. They're able to snap out of it. That would be a normal depressed mood. However, if you're feeling down, or if you're an older adult and you're in more pain and you're not doing what you used to do, and it's interfering with your life, you're not getting out to see your grandkids, you're not doing your morning walk with the ladies anymore, that can be a sign of depression that's problematic. So this is just a laundry list of all the symptoms that we assess for in depression. I talked about the mood as well as not having motivation to do things, but some of the common symptoms that we see will be trouble eating, and that can go either way. Some people with depression eat too much. They kind of eat through their feelings. Other people just have no appetite. Sleep is another thing that goes either way. A lot of folks with depression develop insomnia and they just can't sleep. They may fall asleep, but they either can't stay asleep, or they wake up early in the morning. Or it's the exact opposite. They're sleeping 16, 18, 20 hours a day. So as you see, there are a number of symptoms that go along with depression. So again, what are the risk factors for depression? Having a family history, having big changes in your life. So moving, you decide you want to move to be closer to your children. You move from Michigan to North Carolina. You don't know anyone here. Your kids are working and you have to try to figure out a new life for yourself. That can be very stressful and can trigger depression. Similarly, the stress of COVID certainly created some depression for folks. If you think back to, again, when it first started, I was seeing a lot of people at that time whose biggest problem was the loneliness. People who were in retirement communities or different facilities, they were under lockdown back then. They weren't allowed to leave their homes. And if they were married, they might see their spouse because that was the only other person with them. If they were not married, there was no one else they were really interacting with. They may have only saw the person who was dropping off their meals. So that loneliness that came about from COVID, as well as some of the stresses we talked about earlier about the lethality of it, not knowing what was going on, was a trigger for a lot of people to develop depression. Now, there are a number of health conditions that are associated with depression as well. So it is not uncommon for us to see people develop depression after a heart attack or after a stroke. It's also not uncommon for people to have depression as well as Parkinson's disease. Again, not surprisingly, pain is a risk factor for depression. So if you think about how pain affects us, and I'm not talking about acute pain. So you have a surgery and the surgical area hurts for a couple of weeks and then you're feeling better. I'm talking about pain, maybe something from arthritis, some kind of chronic pain that you experience day in and day out. And that can certainly cause depression as well. And unfortunately, again, being a woman makes you twice as likely to have depression than the men. So again, just some figures on depression in older adults. So as with anxiety, the prevalence of depression does decline with age. We have about 12% of folks who are older than 65 and have depression. And also what's interesting though, which goes to the stress of life and some of the medical problems that occur as we get older, 50% of people have their first episode of depression when they're older. And then again, risk factors for depression, particularly among older adults, include a number of different medical problems. Medications is another thing that we have to be aware of because some medications are associated with a number of symptoms of depression. While insomnia is a symptom of depression, it can also be a trigger. We talked about stress as a trigger for depression. And then when we limit what we do on a day-to-day basis, that can also trigger depression. So again, in COVID, when we were in lockdown and we weren't able to get out to go to the grocery, we weren't able to go take a walk around the neighborhood. Those things, that lack of activity can be a trigger for depression. So I include this slide on here kind of as a public service announcement because it's really important. The rates of suicide among older adults is strikingly high. So as you can see on this chart, the left side here represents the rates of depression in women. And these are the ages starting from preteens all the way on up to 75. And you can see that the highest rates of suicide, completed suicide, are about 8% in the 45 to 64-year-old women. When we go over to the right side, this is all of the rates for men. They're consistently higher for men than for women. But I want to point something out. Look how high the occurrence of completed suicide is for 75 and older men versus, say, teenagers and young adults, which is where you would think you would see some of that, where you think you would see higher rates. So it's almost twice as much by the time men reach 75. So I just want to point that out so that if you ever have contact with someone who brings up end of life, ending their life, wishing they were dead, please take that seriously. So you've got anxiety, you've got depression, what can be done about it? So I'm going to talk about two things today, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a type of treatment that we do here at the Stick Center. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about yoga. So to just kind of give you an overview of what cognitive behavioral therapy is, according to this type of treatment, emotions, so feeling anxious, feeling depressed, is affected by how we think about things, the perspective we take on the world. How we feel emotionally is affected by how we feel physically. So think back to the last time you had, a stomach bug or the flu. You probably felt pretty bad, pretty run down. How you felt impacted your emotions? Because I'm guessing that you were not in a happy-go-lucky mood when you were sick. You probably were feeling pretty blah and down. So how we feel physically impacts our mood. And then this final component, how we act, things we do or don't do affect our mood as well. And so in cognitive behavioral therapy, we address the thoughts, the physical reactions, and the behaviors that we experience so that we can alter our mood in a positive way. So I'm going to give you an example of how our thinking, how the perspective we take on what happens to us, what's going on around us, impacts our mood. So most people think that something happens and we then feel a certain way. So my daughter-in-law invites me to dinner. That's the situation. And I'm feeling anxious. So most people think it's because she invited me that I feel anxious. When in reality, there is an intervening step. Something happens. So here's the situation. We have a certain perspective that we take. And it's that perspective that leads to the feeling. So in this example, your daughter-in-law invites you to dinner is the situation. If your first thought is, well, that's nice of her, it'll be nice to be able to spend some time with her and the family. That's type of thinking is likely going to have you feeling pretty happy. However, if your daughter-in-law invites you to dinner and your thought is, oh gosh, she's a terrible cook, I can't eat that food, I'm going to have to make myself eat it. And then I can't lie to her and tell her it's good, but I also can't tell her it's bad because that would hurt her feelings. If that's what's going on in your head, you're probably feeling pretty anxious and worried about that situation because you don't know what to do. Now, if your daughter-in-law invites you to dinner and your thought is, well, she's only nice to me when she wants something from me. I wonder what it is she wants from me now. I wonder if they're going to go out of town and have me babysit the kids for a whole week like they did last year. That may lead to you feeling aggravated or even angry, irritated. So in this case, there was one situation. The daughter-in-law asked you to dinner, and the result is that you could feel happy, you could feel anxious, you could feel anger. 3 different responses to one situation. Now, in this particular case, we don't know which interpretation is correct. However, anxious people have a tendency to interpret all situations in a similar way that leads to more anxiety. Similarly, people with depression have a tendency to interpret most situations negatively, reinforcing the depression. And so what we do in therapy is we help people learn to take different perspectives so that they can change their mood. So another thing that we do, I said that physical responses influence our mood. Another thing that we focus on in therapy is trying to alter how we feel physically. So one of the things that we do is we teach people to use deep breathing. A lot of times when people get anxious, they breathe very shallowly and don't even realize it. And that actually causes a physiological reaction in our body that makes us more anxious. So we teach people the opposite, how to slow down their breathing to send the opposite message to our brains. And we teach people relaxation exercises, visualization exercises, again, to get control over their physical response. And then thoughts. So I talked some about how our thinking influences our mood. So in therapy, we work on helping people take a different perspective. So first off is working on beginning to recognize these patterns of thinking. We're often not even aware of what we're saying to ourselves. And we work on how to go about changing those patterns and replacing them with more helpful thoughts, or thoughts that are going to promote an improved mood. And so I want to show you this because this is a wonderful example about how it is all about perspective. Everybody is seeing one picture here in the same picture, but we are probably interpreting it in a couple of different ways. So what do you see as you look at this picture? Do you see a young woman or an older woman? So for the younger woman, here's her face. Right here's her jawline. Here's her ear, and she's got black hair. And here's her eyelashes and her nose. Now, there's also an older woman that some people see. So this is the older woman's, the outline of her face. Here's her jawline, her mouth. This is her nose. And these are her eyes here. And here's her oops. Here's her. Sorry, having some technical difficulties here. Here's her other eyelash. Okay, so this is like the same situation, one situation, but our perspective is different. We can see things in different ways. And sometimes one perspective is more helpful than the other. Here's another example of that. Again, one picture we're all looking at, but we're probably seeing two different things. If you focus on going from left to right, you can see a bunny. Here's the bunny's eye. Here is his face with his nose and mouth. And these are the ears. If you flip how you look at it, this is a duck. So again, this is the eye, but this is the beak. His beak is open. So again, this is one situation, one picture, but how we perceive it can differ. So I'm going to skip ahead because we're running out of time to what is probably the most important part for you all, which is what to do if you are feeling anxious, depressed, or stressed. And the first thing I would suggest is that you talk to your healthcare provider. Let them know about how you're feeling so that they can do a full assessment. Again, we talked about how there are a number of medical conditions that can contribute to feeling anxious or depressed. And so that's certainly something you want to have checked out by your provider. But what are some of the other things you can do? Talk to someone. This is not something that you need to hide from people. Talk to people you trust, family, friend, somebody in your church. It can be very helpful just to get this off your chest, just to have somebody listen to you. Get out of your house. So a lot of times when people are feeling anxious and depressed, they isolate themselves. They don't feel like getting out and about. And we've heard how lovely Sika is. Go to Sika, look at some of the exhibits, walk around the grounds. Across the street, well, almost across the street, you've got Renolda House with its exhibits and lovely grounds as well. Get out and about and try to do something. Spend time with other people. Do something meaningful. So people will often find that they feel better if they're doing things that actually help others. So think about, maybe some volunteer work. volunteering with the schools, reading with kids, volunteering in the NICU, rocking babies. There's any number of volunteer activities that people can do to actually to help others, but actually leads to them feeling better about themselves. Consider a support group. Our local mental health association has both support groups for anxiety and depression that are free. Think about taking a class or joining a club. So we have a wonderful resource in our community. The Shepherd Center is absolutely wonderful. And there's a site in Kernersville as well. And they have quite a number of different classes, all different kinds of classes that people can participate in. And I think I'm going to stop here because we're right at 6:30, but my slides will be available. I think that Deb will share those with you all so that you can go through these. And of course, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I was muted. Gosh, that hasn't happened for a while. If anybody has questions, please put them in the chat. Having Dr. Brenes and so many others at the Stick Center is a phenomenal resource that we have right here. And just know that I think if anyone has questions after the fact, we do this every month. If you have questions for the speaker, please just shoot them to me and I will forward them on to her. And seeing none, we just have a lot of thank you and gratitude messages over in the chat. So thank you. And again, just know you will be receiving her slides. And I saw one slide that actually had a book featured on it. So if anyone's interested in getting that, I do have a question here. How can I stop clenching my teeth, which is what I do for anxiety?
So that is something that you would first start with trying to build awareness of when you're doing it. So it may be an issue where you don't realize you're clenching your teeth. And so probably what I would do is maybe even set a timer, set my phone timer every 5-10 minutes, do that for an hour or so to see if I'm clenching my teeth at those times, to see how frequently I'm doing it. And then I would work on purposefully trying to relax the muscles in your jaw. And this would also be a good time to do some deep breathing exercises where you're building awareness of your breathing. And you're focused on slowing down your breathing. It's going to be hard to be clenching your jaw and breathing deeply at the same time.
We have another question. What to do if a friend thinks you're among excuses if you don't feel like meeting up or if you have hearing issues? Also anxiety about being on time and driving there.
Okay, so hearing is a big problem. So it's really difficult to be in a group setting when you're having trouble hearing because you're feeling like you're excluded. And so a one-on-one situation might be better, or a very small group. And at the beginning, remind people that you do have trouble hearing and that you need to have them looking directly at you for you to be able to best understand them. And so the anxiety about driving is a common anxiety in older adults. I have lots of folks who have just given up driving on 40, and that's okay. But you do have to balance it with giving up driving completely, because that can be a big source of independence. And if you lose that, you can, again, as we talked about, become very socially isolated. So in those cases, I would try to, if somebody invites you for an evening event and you're just not comfortable at night, Either try to get a ride with someone else or tell them, I don't drive at night, but maybe we could meet for coffee sometime this week. That would be a nice alternative, something that you might feel comfortable driving to, and it would be during the daytime. And it lets the other person know that you're interested in being with them, having that relationship, but it really is the nighttime driving that's the problem.
Another question, how does a person who wasn't shy as a child, but now has panic attacks?
Well, so those risk factors are not 100%. So it doesn't mean that every shy child will develop anxiety, but it also doesn't mean that if you weren't shy, that you won't develop it. So while it is a risk factor, it's not 100%.
And I will remind everybody, because one person has requested copies of your slides. So
Okay.
just to remind everyone, you will be getting the complete copy of Dr. Brenes' slides when I send you the link for this video. And you know what's great is when y'all go to this link, you can not only watch this webinar again, but you can go back. I think almost every one we've ever done since we have been allowed to record these is archived there. So you can go back and rewatch anything that we have recorded in the past. So even if you missed one in the past, go back and watch it again now. We'd love to have you. And I will tell you this, until next time, until August 9th, that's right. I just want to make sure I always get it right. Be safe, have fun, enjoy our North Carolina summer, stay cool, and mostly we're all aging well together. So have a wonderful, wonderful month until we meet again. Thank you.